3A is one of the largest providers in the country for apprenticeships, but it's now being investigated by the police after claims of inflated success rates.
You do a Google search of Peter Marples and it still says police, although the police never came anywhere, didn't speak to anybody. And I drove home and I cried my eyes out. When you exit a business, when you sell a business, it's a very, very traumatic position. It came home and sunk a couple of bottles of wine, I think, not in celebration, and I just couldn't adjust. And 2 days later, I was in hospital having my stomach pumped.
But you went on to build a consortium, am I right, to go and buy a local team?
No. I mean, being blunt, and I'll be honest, we all fell out. Made lots of mistakes. My biggest success? Blending a family.
Yeah.
Not money.
Hello and welcome to Leaders in Disguise. I only have one rule for you, and that's to be kind to our guests. To be brave and vulnerable in a world where stigma still exists, I ask you to listen carefully and celebrate their success with me. Now, for this episode, I sat down with a remarkable Peter Marples, former owner, shareholder of Derby County Football Club, who, might I add, led it to the Premier League, a multi-millionaire businessman, and former owner of 3As. I got to delve into Peter's career, a dynamic one at that, and touched on the highs and lows of his business ventures and the real emotional impact of selling his first business to, well, you've seen a trailer. Before we dive into Peter's quite compelling story, I just want to remind you of the overarching mission of Leaders in Disguise. This podcast is dedicated to breaking a stigma that comes with mental health and well-being for leaders, particularly in the SME and entrepreneurial community. I would like you to share these stories not only with your friends, your family, but especially with your leaders. So without further ado, let's jump into the story of Peter Marples and how he navigated challenges in his career. Pete, thank you very much. I'm really pleased to finally sit down with you. I feel like it's been a long time coming and an opportunity to talk about things that I know not only I've been waiting to talk about, but I know people have been listening and had lots of questions as well.
Good to meet you, Gary. Good to meet you.
How are we doing anyway? How are we doing?
Yeah, life's really good. Yeah, I mean, the sun's out, isn't it? That's the important thing. And England at the football can only get better. So it's been pretty torrid first 3 games or so. But yeah, life's good. We've got a lot of stuff going on with business, and personal life's really good. We've got 5 grandchildren now, I think we've got. So, and that's a sign of old age, I think, creeping on very quick. But yeah, everything's really good. Thanks.
That's good.
Yeah.
Business-wise, I'll avoid talking about the England games because by the time this goes out, it'll obviously have got better because it always does.
That or knocked out.
Yeah, absolutely. When I say better, I mean in a positive way. But for you and business, so you sound great. You sound like you're living the life of, I'm sure, grandchildren running around and being looked after. How about business-wise? What are you up to at the moment?
Yeah, well, I've got quite a lot going on, actually, business-wise. I mean, I think I took a view a few years ago, post 3As and whatever, which actually I'm only going to work with people I like. Yeah, we set up an alternative divorce business, which is, given the fact that I'm not a lawyer. So I've got that. I still work quite a lot within the education space. I chair probably 3 education businesses, a very progressive and exciting business that deals with multi-academy trusts. Sarah, my wife, and I have a little property business. We have that's building nicely. And then we're building a new business called Legacy Fortress, which is about a digital vault to protect your assets in the event of death. And then we've got a number of other things. I'm working on a LGBTQ fashion brand, would you believe? With some friends and somebody who's an influencer in that market. So yeah, everything's good. And then we've got the small matter of a little court case against the government, which is occupying quite a bit of time at the moment. So
It sounds like a business in itself, and we'll go into that.
it certainly is, yeah.
As much as we can do, and I said before we started recording today that we need to get the balance right with that, because of course, if that's an active case, the last thing we want to do is prejudice anything that's there. You and I will do our very best not to do that, I'm sure, today, although we're not experts in that area. But yeah, we'll come into that, because
Absolutely.
that's interesting. And you joke about, grandchildren, and you've had so much experience and so many years in business. Forgive me for
Are you
making
trying to
you
tell
sound...
say I'm old? Barry?
Forgive
is
me.
that what it is?
Absolutely not. Not while we're sat on this couch, anyway. And maybe off camera. And you've obviously got a lot of experience behind you, and you're still going strong. You've still got lots of fingers in lots of different pies of some really varied things there. And the first question I was going to ask you was, why divorce? Why behind that? And you talked about Sarah, so still there. It's nothing inspired by her.
No. Well, actually, I'm very much an ideas person. I'm not particularly good at operations, but I think my skill set is about having a vision and an idea and spotting an opportunity that people don't spot.
Are there any ideas that you're willing to share that you wish that you'd started that you've never got round to? You said 5 years there.
Loads of ideas. So Legacy Fortress, which is a business we're building, is basically a digital vault. So for when you die, when my mum and dad died, it was all in it's all in a cardboard box under the bed. Now with digital legacy in reality, bank accounts, pensions, all of that, most people don't know what people have got. So how do you capture all of that information? So in my, it's a bit of a running joke in our household. If you go into my office when the kids arrive, we have a lever arch file in my office, and it's called Death and Accident, right? Which is pretty horrible, but
yeah.
And it's got within it not just the wills and the powers of attorneys, but it's got what do we want, who's having the dogs, where's the jewellery, where's the handbags, nearly all Sarah's stuff, as you can tell. Where are the life assurance policies? Where are the pensions? Where are the bank accounts? We have a property portfolio. The kids know we've got a property portfolio, but they don't know where the properties are.
Yeah.
And all of those sorts of things. And it's we're building that as we speak. And that was, again, another idea that through a conversation with somebody 5 or 6 years ago, I thought, actually, there's something in that. I got offered to join Mel in Candy Crush many years ago, which I turned down, which was a bit of a regret. But yeah, loads of things that and you sometimes you start these things and they don't actually work out, and that's the nature of business. And you've got to make sure that you spot that early, I think, really. And some of the best ideas, you think they're great ideas, but unfortunately nobody wants to buy them.
What's your thoughts around that? Because they're quite, I guess, flippantly in a positive way, you've said, sometimes they don't work out. That is the biggest fear of so many people, that something doesn't work out. I had a conversation earlier this week with somebody that their biggest fear was success. How do you manage that, knowing that you've got this great idea and it could fail, but you could be the victim of your success here. You could be you could be the Mel Morris that sets up Candy Crush.
I think that I have never, ever, in the whole of my career, and I'm pretty old now, ever got out of bed thinking I want to make money. Never, ever. I want to take an idea and make the idea a success. And I think, I've always felt this, that if you operate in that way and you have a passion, you've got to have a passion for doing what you're doing. If you do, actually, the chances are it will become a success. And the money part of it is a byproduct of it. And, I know we'll touch upon sort of mental health and things, but in 2005, when I sold my first business, I tried to commit suicide the day after I sold it. Not because I'd got lots of money, which I had, more money than I could ever have dreamt of. But actually, I'd lost my baby. My baby was my business, which I'd put 18 hours a day into, 7 days a week, and I just felt empty. And I think one of the big issues for business people is when you exit a business, when you sell a business, it's a very, very traumatic position. And everybody thinks, it's great. You've got X or Y or Z. It doesn't matter whether it's £100 or £1 million or £100 million. But actually, when you've put your heart and soul into something, it's actually hard to give it up. And then sometimes you only know what you've missed after it's gone. And the loneliness of selling a business and the phone stops ringing is very, very hard to adjust to. And I found that back in 2005 incredibly hard to adjust to.
2005, we're 2024 now, so this is a good while ago. You acquired a business, you grew it. I'm sure it became more successful from my very poor memory. It became even more successful, and then you sold it. That should have been success. That should have been happy, but it sounded quite final then. So
it was. I can remember doing the deal in Birmingham, 13th of September 2005, and I drove home and I cried my eyes out down the A38, and I'd got a lot of money, a big 8-figure sum, and I came home and sunk a couple of bottles of wine, I think, not in celebration, and I just couldn't adjust. And 2 days later, I was in hospital having my stomach pumped, and I just felt empty, very, very empty. And even now, 20 years later, I get still quite emotional about it.
Yeah, thank you. And feel free to take a minute if you need
to.
No,
not at all. Fire away.
It sounds. I'm trying to just get it into my own head, because so many people see success as this happy, joyous moment. Does money buy you happiness then?
No. My wife has this saying, all it does, it makes you more comfortable in your misery. And she's
I can see why you get on so well.
And she's always right, my wife. Money doesn't make you happy. No, you get to a point where you just desire more. And actually you're on a journey desiring more, then you have enough. And then actually, as I said right from the outset, business people, men or women, 99% of successful business people don't get out of bed thinking I'm going to make money. They get out of bed because they have an innate passion for doing whatever they do. And going back to the 3A's days, I used to go and talk to the apprentices, because a lot of our apprentices were sort of 16 to 19, and I'd tell them a story, and we'd ask questions, and I used to say to them, I used to have two analogies. One is, if you're gonna be in business, do it young, because you might fail, but you don't have the family responsibilities, you don't have a mortgage, and therefore your failure is less impactful on people. So do it young and you bounce back. And that's the first bit. And the second advice I always gave was, do something you have a passion for. So for example, if your passion is making fish and chips, there's nothing wrong with making fish and chips. Just be the best in the country at making fish and chips, and you'll have 30 or 40 or 50 fish and chip shops, and the money will flow, because you will build a brand. You'll build a reputation for excellence in whatever you're doing. And those are the two things I always used to say to the young apprentices. And a lot of those young apprentices went on to build their own businesses very, very successfully around the country. And I still believe that to this day. That's the heart of what business is about.
I love that because I can almost see or hear them, watch them listening to those words that you're saying now, and I'm sure there's many people that will thank you for it, and there will ultimately have been people in that would have failed, but just hearing you say that, it really just dispels this myth that failure and success are these final achievements or final failure, that's it. Once you've failed, once you've succeeded, that's the end of it.
It is a bit in England. If you go to America, failure is part of life. It's an experience that is celebrated. I've never gone bankrupt. I don't want to go bankrupt, but people who've been bankrupt and come out the other end in America are celebrated. in the UK, we just have this social media press, and I've been through it, as you know, where actually, they build you into a pedestal of success, and then they spend their time trying to fire the guns to fire you off the pedestal. And it's hard. It's a very hard if you ever get yourself into that situation.
So have you always just taken it right back then? You talk about some of the younger people that you've spoken to. You called yourself old earlier, by the way, so I'm going to hold you to that. You've got all of these years of experience. You were this young, equally probably had a million more ideas back then that you've put into action. Passionate young guy that wants to go out in the world and make a difference. Where did that start for you? What's the very first thing that you did?
I think young? I think that. I was a swimmer, like my nephew. I know you've interviewed Lee. I was a very competitive swimmer, and I think that getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning every day, then coming back, going to school, then going to swim, then doing galas, seeing the world swimming, was something that was embedded into me from a very young age, 7 or 8, 9, 10, 11 years of age. And that is something that's never left me, that competitive spirit. And you don't go to a gala to lose, you go to a gala to win, okay? And I think my parents were sub-postmasters in Wirksworth, so in Derbyshire, quite a big sub-postmaster. So they weren't, I wouldn't call them business people, but they had this up at 5 o'clock to open the office, get the postman in and all of that sort of stuff. So it started there. My mother indoctrinated me and said, you're useless with your hands, Peter. My brother was the opposite. And you're going to be either a bank manager or an accountant. And then because I was competitive, I didn't want to do A-levels. It was O-levels in those days. That's how old I am. And I was determined to become an accountant. And I was determined to be qualified by the time my friends left university at 21. So I set myself that objective. Don't know why, but I did. And I joined Derbyshire County Council as a trainee accountant back in 1980. And did day release and then did night school, doing A-levels at night school at Chesterfield Tech. And then 5 or 6 years later was qualified just at 21. And then the day I qualified, I handed my notice in. And I went to work for the civil service, would you believe, for the audit commission.
So a very different route there, going public sector and not what many people would expect you to have done is gone and set up your own business straight away.
No, not at all. And I never entered my head about becoming a business person at all. And then I had 2 years in the civil service, which was very good experience, but not the greatest if you were go-getting career-wise. It wasn't, it was like you've been promoted, but now wait to be placed in the next job for the year, and that just wasn't me. And then I joined KPMG in Birmingham in 1990, and I suppose that was probably the big change in my career. I went to get some commercial experience rather than doing public sector experience, but I ended up doing public sector, and within 5 years I was an equity partner in KPMG, which was unheard of. A non-grad, non-person who didn't train with the firm, and so at very young age I was an equity partner, but worked 18 hours a day every day of the week, and just worked hard. I wasn't technically good. I was a very good salesperson. And that's how it started, really. And then I suppose it took off from there. But still, I'd never had an idea about becoming a business person.
Your route is so, forgive me for using the word unconventional, but like you say, not what's expected. And certainly in the 90s, I'm sure KPMG would have had some stricter rules that either you graduate and come in with a degree, or tough, you're not for us. I know that rules have got a bit more relaxed over these days. I've got a good old friend of mine that her company did the opposite, where they said you now need a degree.
But it has gone full circle. And the thing about it, and I'm passionate about apprentices.
Absolutely.
That, not only did I qualify early, but when I went to KPMG at 23, 24, I'd had 8 years work experience. And it's, it's pretty hard to become a partner in a big international firm. There's a lot of people come in at the top of the funnel, and there's very few people come out the other end as a partner. I was very proud of that. Very proud.
Well done. You were going to say there was an element there.
Yeah, I mean, again, one of the things I wish I did, is have a black book. I've got a pretty good black book, right? But I look back now and go, if I had spent a little bit more time cultivating relationships and my black book over the years, and have a relationship such that you can call those people up for a little bit of advice or whatever, that's the big telling difference. And one of the things we don't educate people in professions or in any job is actually how to build relationships. And therefore building your black book from a very early age and building those relationships, I think is absolutely critical. And that's the bit I wish I'd have done a bit more of.
So just jumping forward then, because we want to get to some of the really other interesting bits that I've got on my very long list here. But just to cover off KPMG, so your area was education, wasn't it?
Yeah, I ran the education practice in the UK, so dealing with local universities, colleges of further education, not so much schools, government, a lot of government work, a lot of international work. So I built the education consultancy business for KPMG. And then in 2002, I was headhunted by Ernst & Young to go and become their European head of marketing, because I could sell, and I got the job, and earning a lot of money, a huge amount of money. And so let me give you a perspective. In 2002, and this is the risk that I took, in 2002, that job offer was paying $750,000 a year, plus bonuses. And when I came out of that interview, the deputy UK senior partner, a guy called Mark Molyneux, said to me, "Peter, you should be running your own business." And it never entered my head. And I walked out, I got in a taxi, I rang my wife, Jill, as she was then, and said, "How did it go?" I said, "Well, I've got the job, but he said I should be running my own business." And 6 months later, I left KPMG and joined a little training business in Newcastle.
Which I believe you acquired?
Then did a buyout of that business 9 months later. Wasn't planned. And I had no idea how to do a buyout of a business. Absolutely clueless. And we bought that business in September 2003. And then 2 years later, sold it to a PLC for a lot of money.
A lot.
Yeah.
So continuing to wind forward, sold the business. You sold it to Carter and Carter.
Yeah, PLC.
Yeah. So I did a big change up there. But of course, you suddenly, we heard that he'd lost his life, a big helicopter crash.
That's right, in 2007, May of 2007. I should have been with him that night. I'm sure a lot of people think I should have been with him, but I should have been with him up at the European Cup semi-final between Liverpool and Chelsea. And he was flying home and unfortunately crashed about 300 yards from his house. He wasn't flying it, but him and 4 passengers, including his son, tragically passed. And actually, my ex-wife, I keep mentioning her, and Sarah won't be very happy, she actually found him. As you probably know, my ex-wife was a helicopter pilot, and I got a call about 3 a.m. to say he'd gone missing. And we got our helicopter out with the pilot, and eventually she found him in some woods, crashed at about 7 a.m., something like that morning. So horrible. I was very close to Phil. And again, probably the first time in my life, mortality started to look at it and think, oh, flipping out. Oh, I should have been. I gave my ticket away because I didn't want to go, and gave it to a guy, and he drove up, and I should have been staying with Phil that night at his house because we were going down to London the following morning. So, yeah, and then I immediately resigned from Carter and Carter and left, and retired again. So, yeah.
Again, absolutely, yeah. And sorry to hear that. It's obviously great to have you here today. An event a change of events that ultimately led you to here today. There's a connection there, quite tedious connection into football and etc. You've always been a huge football fan. I'm assuming this, so I'm sure you have been. One of the fascinating things that I learned about you, I'm not a football fan. I don't do much exercise other than leaving the house to get in the car and driving down the road, let alone watching sport on TV. But you went on to build a consortium, am I right, to go and buy a local team that I'm sure had you been supporting for many years, Derby County?
That's right. Well, I wouldn't say I don't want to get sued, so I didn't lead the consortium. It was a guy called Peter Gadsby who I think, be fair to say, brought the consortium together. I was going to buy it anyway. The club was 50 odd million in debt. I'd sold my business. I'd got a lot of money, and I had said to my father, and people won't believe this, but it's true. I'd said to my father when I was about 7 years of age, and I used to go to the old baseball ground from that age with him every game. I'd said, one day, Dad, I'm going to buy you the football club. And I did. So I was going to buy it. I met Peter Gadsby at Pride Park, who I didn't know, at the Rod Stewart concert, which was in the summer of 2005. I was hopelessly drunk, and he said, well, why don't you join my consortium? And I said, not really, I'm going to do it myself.
I've retired, I don't want to.
I'm retired. And then a few weeks later, I met him, had a coffee, and then really took it on, and very, very proud, because it was myself that actually did all of the negotiations with the Co-op Bank, all of the negotiations, and it was myself that concluded that transaction with the support mainly by a guy called Mike Horton, and Mike became ultimately the chief executive of the club and a shareholder, and we all had the same shares. John Kirkland, who was an amazing man. Mel Morris, that's how I met Mel for the first time. And 2006 we bought the club debt free. It was 53 or 56 million in debt. Bought it debt free, and who would know, a year later we were in the Premier League, which was an entertaining journey to say the least.
Absolutely, congratulations. 12 months in to be able to get to that point.
And whilst it was a disaster in the Premier League, I do remind people that probably since then there's probably been about 700 million invested in Derby County by the Americans, by Mel, by the current owner, and we still haven't got back to the Premier League. So we didn't get the I don't think we got the merit that we deserved for doing what we did as an owner group, accepting that we weren't the manager. Billy Davis was the manager, and Billy didn't get the credit he deserved either, nor did the team, actually. And that's a bit of a regret. I don't know if it was a regret, a bit annoying, I think, over the last few years, that we didn't, as a group, get the credit that I think we deserved.
So I look at Leicester and I look at the amount of, I don't know if it's a Gary Lineker kind of connection, but looking at Leicester and what they've done and how well recognised that has been, as somebody that doesn't follow football, for me, certainly the credit was there and the merit was there with a team like that. Was that always your plan? Will you always, I guess in a football club, you're always wanting to get into the Premier League? Was that did it happen sooner? Was that a more longer term aim? Was it 5 or 10 years later you thought it might happen?
We bought it coming, I think we finished fourth, I think, in the year we bought it. We bought it literally the day after the last game of the season. And the day after we bought it was Ted McMinn, quite a famous ex-player. It was his testimonial against Rangers. So it was an amazing weekend. And look, the ambition was to get into the Premier League, but we'd finished nearly the bottom of the Championship, and we'd all come together as this group we were called the League of Gentlemen, and we were less than the League of Gentlemen, I can assure you. And we didn't know hardly each other, to be honest. So we were this ramshackle bunch of blokes, plus my ex-wife, I have to say, who were all brought together, and we did remarkably well in that sense. But yes, it was the ambition, but to get there within a year was like, what on earth's happened here? And it all came far too quick, really. But I would never take away the experience, because it was one of very few people own their own local football club, and particularly in the Premier League.
Yes, and this relates to me in business as well. When we get such big achievements, and I don't know if I've ever had the business equivalent of reaching the Premier League, we get recognised, don't we, by so many people. We start attracting investment. I was surprised to read that very early into that, was it a year or two that you then sold to a bigger American consortium? Was that always the plan? Did you?
No. I mean, being blunt, and I'll be honest, we all fell out in reality. Okay. As happens where you've got 5 or 6 successful people in their own right, all having their own opinions as to the way it should work. And it was agreed at the end of the day that probably the best thing for the club was for us to sell it to the Americans. So we sold it to General Sports Entertainment out of Detroit, Andy Appleby and his team, who did well. They were good custodians, very good custodians of the football club. Didn't get the success they deserved. And it was a chapter in the book that probably 2 or 3 chapters in the book actually in terms of that. And lessons learned again, lots of lessons learned.
One of the ironic statement is, we've won the Premier League, everybody falls out. Yeah. How does that even happen? Does it suddenly get a bit too much?
I mean, when you look back and you get a bit older, you just think, why did we? It was all a bit petty, probably. Bit of power play going on between various people, including myself. I mean, I'm not going to say it wasn't me. There were a lot of individuals involved, and I think the lesson I learned out of that is that sometimes when you're in the trenches and you're coming out as the captain out the trenches into battle, and you have some support that are going to follow you out the trenches, sometimes when you look back and you're out the trench and they're not behind you anymore, you go, actually, I need... And that's happened to me probably 2 or 3 times in my career. And I get very disappointed with people that don't follow you out the trenches when they say they're going to commit to. And that was probably the problem there.
Are you still all talking now?
Not really. No, I talk to some of them.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be in the same room as some of the others, if truth was not. And I'm sure the feeling is mutual.
Okay. I was going to ask you if you all got back together again. Maybe is this the thing that Derby needs to see? Is that you all get back in a room together?
I think they're in very good hands with David Clowes now. I think David's a local guy. He's passionate about the football club. I don't actually know David particularly. I don't know David at all, actually. I think they're in very, very good hands, and I wish them the best of luck. I'd love to buy another club, but my wife won't let me, so...
You've got too much going on already. I'm sure you know a lot of people that could run it for you and get involved. Sorry to interrupt you, but I've got a really important message. This podcast wouldn't be what it is today without you and the brave individuals that come onto the podcast and tell their own story of vulnerability and adversity. So please jump onto your most favourite platform, the one that you're using right now, and click subscribe, like, and even leave a review, because without you and the comments that you leave, we can't do this. We can't normalise the conversation around mental health and well-being for leaders. Let's jump back into the episode. Let's jump on to 3As. A hugely successful business. You had, let's look at my notes here, 4,500 learners. You had over 500 staff throughout the UK. Huge business.
And America.
I didn't know that. Huge business. Why did somebody that knew the education market back we've spoken about 2-3 things since you stepped away from KPMG. Why somebody that self-admittedly was going to retire, step back, did you start a business like 3As?
Well, 3As wasn't a business to do apprenticeships to start with. It was my person who I worked with at Carter & Carter, who became my business partner. She exited Carter & Carter, and we got together. We'd known each other for many years, and said, well, let's create a consultancy business. And my background was building consultancy businesses. It was easy. And for me, it was a bit of part-time pocket money. For her, it was a job because she needed a job. And that's how we started. It didn't take long then for somebody approached us, a guy called Gary Redmonds. Tragically, he passed during COVID or just after COVID, only young. And we sat with him and we started having a discussion about training and where the market was and all of those things. And we sat and said logistics is the place to be, because there was something called the Drivers Directive that was coming in.
Yes.
CPC, I think it was called.
Yeah, I remember it well.
And we said, we knew nothing about logistics. And so we said, right. And he said, I think I can get UPS as a client. And we said, you get UPS as a client, we'll get the funding and let's crack on. And that's what we did. So that wasn't apprenticeships. It was something called Train to Gain, an old government initiative. And we cracked on, and we had no staff. We ran it out of my house up at Morley, and we were doing the enrolments ourselves, 50 enrolments a week on a Monday, and we'd be at UPS in Tamworth at 5 a.m. for the first shift, and we would finish at 1 the following morning, because there were 3 or 4 shifts that were starting, drivers and warehouse people, and that's how we started. And then it was only so that was 2009, we set about 2009. And then 2011, the guy called Mark Humphreys, who helped me when I did the buyout, rang me up. I was in America. And he said, I've just sold this business. He said, and does apprenticeships, and it's doing IT, and it's brilliant, this model is. I said, I don't believe you. Anyway, I rang Gary and said, look, go and have a look at this business. And we did a bit of mystery shopping on this business within days, literally days. And that's how we set up 3As as an apprenticeship business through, I wouldn't say we pinched the idea, we took an idea and refined the idea. And then within 3 years, we had created 38 centres across the UK. And when you look back, you think that was 16 centres a year, that we were opening a centre every 3 weeks. Yeah. And they were beautiful centres. They were absolutely beautiful. And then we opened in America in 2016, and we were the first ever private training provider to do apprenticeships in America. And that is still operating in America.
What? Maybe it's still a secret. What was the formula to 3As that made it so different in that market at that time?
A number of things, but philosophy I have narrow and deep. So we did very few apprenticeship standards or frameworks, as they're called. Most providers, colleges, training providers, they say we offer everything from agriculture through to floristry through to IT. Right? We didn't do that. We did IT and accountancy. So we only delivered about 6 or 7 frameworks. But we did them in 38 centres, and I used to call it's the Pizza Express model. You can't have a half and half. You can't have a Domino's with us. You can have a Pizza Express, but it's good quality, and it's delivered in a very consistent way. And then we had, using the pizza analogy, we used to have what we call in Derby, we used to call it our chef's kitchen, where if we have an idea, we would have the academy downstairs, and we would deliver the idea. Within a week of delivering the idea, we'd send it downstairs into the academy. They would test it with the local marketplace in Derby. So thank you to the local marketplace in Derby. And the feedback from the employers, if it was positive, we would tweak it and move it forward. And if the feedback was negative, we'd dump it, frankly. So we commercialized the model very rapidly. And we had, at the time, it wasn't hard because we had a model and the model rolled, and it was easy to replicate the model in a way. We were the only people doing it, but it was easy to do. But there was a lot of people put a lot of effort in, working lots of hours, not just the owners, but lots of other people. And we had actually a great team. And the one regret I have, and I was only talking to my wife the other day about it, is probably I didn't say thank you enough to people because they put in a huge amount of effort. And at the heart of everything was the learner.
Yes.
And the employer. We're always about, everybody will know, we're always about Derby. We were sponsoring everything from the ice rink to the cricket club to football club. And we became intrinsic to Derby. But not only were we intrinsic to Derby, we were intrinsic to the other 38 towns and cities that we were in as well. Everybody thought we were a Derby business, but actually we were a much bigger business than that.
Absolutely.
So regret saying thank you a bit more often. Should have done.
Yes,
Didn't.
you've got a microphone in front of you if you want to.
Yeah.
It's there. You should have so many people to thank, though.
And a huge amount of hard work, but we've created a passion. And one of the good things about it all is I look at the industry now, which is nowhere near as good as the industry was when we were in it. There's some little spriglets of businesses. Most of those businesses are run by 3A's people. Nearly every single one across the country is run by an ex-3A's person. And I sit back, actually, when I have a nice glass of red with my wife and go, we did something right.
Yeah. I think that's it. It's making that change. And sadly, the business failed, if that's the best way to put this. However, you've still created that legacy. Those people, you've made that change. You've educated a market. This has been a really tough period for you, though. That was 2018.
Yeah.
What were your feelings? And I've asked this to others at the time. How did it feel the day that you found that the business had failed, that the administrators had been appointed?
Pretty dreadful. As you probably know, my business partner and I sort of exited the business in September because we're fed up of it. The ESFA, which was the funder at that time, had identified apparently some data issues, and that they'd started an investigation, but they'd only been on site once for literally one day. And I just said, I've just had enough of this, and we exited. And I went on holiday to Antigua, and I found out about it sitting by a poolside in Antigua. And the next thing, so in a way, I was fortunate I wasn't here because there was press everywhere. There were TV cameras at the gates at our house. My daughter actually was at the house, so I knew what was going on, but I wasn't there. It was on national TV. It was all about police being called, and I remember my wife's an ex-police officer. And I said, Sarah, I'm going to get arrested when I get off the plane. And she said, Peter, you're not important enough. And actually, frankly, nothing happened. And to this day, and I say it with my hand on my heart, to this day, I have no idea why the business was closed. I have had no report, no investigation, nothing. So it's a mystery. It is genuinely a mystery.
You talked about money not being this big factor for you. Of course it's there and it helps, and it doesn't buy happiness, but it helps us along the way. Certainly sat at a swimming pool in Antigua. Am I right in saying that you never would have wanted that business to fail for the monetary value anyway? If you take emotion out of it, take out the 4,500 people, the 500 staff, the different countries, the face, the embarrassment that comes with it, I'm sure. Were you still invested in it? Did you still own the money?
I was still the majority shareholder in the business, so lost all of that. And at the end of the day, we all have our view. My view is that they were that the government were very envious about what we'd achieved, what we'd delivered. And actually, being blunt, if they didn't like me running the business, there should have been a mature conversation about that. And I would have stood aside and allowed somebody else very easily to take on the running of that business. As it was, 500 staff were displaced. They all got a job the day after with another provider. People forget that. And there were 5,000 learners that got displaced, the majority of which did get reallocated very rapidly. But unfortunately, there were young learners who didn't get replaced, and that damaged their careers. And that all could have been avoided, with some mature conversation. If they didn't want Peter Marples, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I'm brave enough, and I've got enough scars on my back to overcome those sorts of things. But it was done in a very, very shoddy way, in my personal opinion.
It sounds quite personal. It sounds that if I could imagine your face on a poster saying "wanted," there was no no police waiting.
My wife and
you.
I had death threats. If I was to say to you, my wife has been in Derby in the last 6 years once, she will not come into Derby because of the way people react to her. I'm a bit more broad-shouldered, to be perfectly honest, but I don't come into Derby very often. Not because I'm scared. I just actually... the other thing is, which, when things like that happen, you learn who your friends are. And, we invested as a business, and therefore, because it was a private business, personally, millions of pounds into this city. Millions of pounds. And we had a choice to do that, and we did, because we thought we were part of the community. Everybody dropped us. From the cricket club to... everybody dropped us, and our reputations were destroyed. And still to this day, people will say, I'd love to work with you, but I can't work with you because if X finds out I'm working with you. So it's had a very long tail to it, and you do a Google search of Peter Marples and it still says police, although the police never came anywhere, didn't speak to anybody. It still says, fraud. It still says all of those horrible words, and those words will sit there forever. Never proven, because, being blunt, it didn't happen.
And I was going to say, there's an opportunity to put the record straight. What did happen? What was going on in the business that made it fail? I know you've got a very strong personal opinion.
As I said to you, what happened was we had an Ofsted inspection in the May of 18. We got grade ones across the board again for the second time. My wife and I Sarah and I were in No Man's Fort for the weekend in Portsmouth, and we got in the car on the way back, and I got a phone call from the press, the trade press, to say you're under investigation. That's the first I knew about it. The ESFA came in a week later for a couple of hours, and we never heard a dicky bird from him since.
You've got a very strong opinion on this. So this is where we carefully navigate the world of the legal world. What's going on right now with this? I believe you've got...
It's nothing. There's a legal case against the DFE at the moment. The family are taking a legal case, which is now 18 months in. It's actually nothing to do with the closure of the business in 18.
Oh, interesting.
It's all to do with the fact that we were selling the business in 2016, 23rd of December 16, for just under 100 million, and the government prevented it on the day that the deal was happening. We were going to Flint's to sign the paperwork, and they stopped it from happening. So the legal case is about that.
So just to get this right on my own head, so Department for Education, DFA, you were trying to sell it and going through that stage. And then how many months later, when you were sat on there and you heard the news, it went to administration? What was that timeline?
About just under 2 years. 2 years after.
And you clearly said, a minute ago, you said, actually, we'd had enough. We wanted to move on.
Anyway,
You tried to sell it. You were left with it.
Yeah, so by the fact that we were unable to sell it in 2016 because the government wouldn't let us, made it unsaleable, fundamentally. So the legal case is about that. It's been going on for 18 months. It has all of the makings of Horizon. The government have apparently 900,000 documents on me, but they won't release them. So there's a separate court action on that. And we'll see how it plays out over the next 6 months. We have a trial set for June 2025.
So court case, separate regards to the closure, the failure of that business. Apologies for using that word failure. I guess that's what it was. That's failed.
What it was, yeah.
There's separate things going on. Where did it put you as an individual? Where were you? Because I'm playing back what we spoke about earlier as this person in 2005 when you sold your business and you had this kind of lonely, what I don't know, whatever was going through your mind at the time. Was there a dark place that you went to at that time?
Well, I think in 2018, I think the thing that got me through was my wife, who is an amazing person. As I said, she brings me back down to earth every day of the week. I don't do anything without permission. But yeah, I mean, it's really dark. And I think that what got me through it was the fact that I actually, when I had those dark times in 2005, I went to see a cognitive behavioural therapist. And I'm the most skeptical, cynical person in the world about any of that therapy stuff. And actually, after about 5 sessions, a guy called Ian, after about 5 sessions, he said, "Right, that's it. There's no point you coming again." And I said, no, I'm coming every weekend. And I used to go every 2 weeks to Nottingham to his house and do an hour and a half for 2.5 years.
Wow.
And I think, and that was all about perspective. It was all about taking one thing at a time, one step in front of the other, all of those sorts of things. And I learned so much from that. And I don't think I would have coped in 18 if I hadn't have gone through that. And I think I probably referred 20 people to Ian over the years, and all of them have had massive value out of, not necessarily Ian, but he is very good, but out of that experience of perspective, putting things in places, in boxes. He said, your life is an apartment and you need floors for you and floors for your children and floors for the wife and all of those sorts of things. And people who know me and people who've seen me, certainly in the early 10s, I used to blow up, unacceptable behaviour, whatever. And that was because I had the stress levels got up, and people normally, you go to bed and the stress levels go down and that balances. And for me, it never went down. And when it tipped over, it bubbled over. It could be the slightest little thing, innocuous thing that would happen. And I would just explode and go into a mood, you could call it, but depression, frankly, for days on end. And I learned through that process that got me through 2018, but most importantly with Sarah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because every episode I seem to be coming back to this place where we talk about the stigma of depression, about entrepreneurs, millionaires. I don't know if you've ever called yourself that on paper. You are. Absolutely. And we shy away from this world of, don't talk about therapy in the UK. We talked earlier about culture. We don't like to talk about therapy because if people find out we've had therapy, then that's dangerous.
It's weakness. And
that's how it sounds.
It's not at all. And again, let's go back to Carter & Carter. When I went into Carter & Carter in 2005, one of the things we did, based upon my experience, is we had, this is nearly 20 years ago, I went to the board of the PLC because I was on the board of the PLC, and I said, we need this level of service for our senior staff. And what we did then is we had my cognitive behavioural therapist, Ian, and he provided a service to all of those people on a wholly confidential basis. And all we got was an invoice once a month. Didn't have the name of the person on it. Wow. And there were lots of people would go, and they might need 1 session or 2 sessions. Some people may have 5 or 10 sessions. And that is we were so far ahead of ourselves in that day. And it was interesting. I was talking to one of our divorce clients only the other day. He was a very senior director of a very big privately owned business in the UK. And he has introduced us to the board of that business because he said that the impact of divorce on those senior people is so significant that they can directly tell if somebody's going through a personal problem that it has a dramatic impact upon production, profitability, efficiency of that business. And therefore, why don't we as a business be a resident, retained advisors on divorce or marital breakdown or whatever it may be? And that's what we're doing. We're going to see their board in the next few weeks, actually. And everybody needs it. And I think that, one of my concerns about society is that, and I look at my grandchildren, I look at my children who are all in the 30s, who are all very sound, sensible people. But we need to educate people in what resilience is about. We've lost resilience as a country, as a society. Social media in the last 15, 20 years is heavily responsible, I think. But I do fear, I don't want to end on a negative, but I fear that our people, our young people, are not resilient enough. And mental illness is a very serious thing. Before it became, not trendy is not the right word, but before it became so fashionable, or that's not the word, but we allow people, and actually life is about being resilient. And hopefully in the last hour, my story is about bumpy roads. It's not all about success by any stretch of the imagination. And you learn about how you overcome that. And you can't do it yourself. You need great partnerships. I have an amazing relationship with Sarah. I have an amazing relationship with actually all the 4 children. And blending a family together is probably the hardest thing I've ever done. But we have to educate our young people on what resilience is and actually knowing where to go and get some help. Because I think that there's a lot of people who do have illness, have anxiety, whatever it may be, but actually don't know where to get it. And being frank, the NHS isn't the place for it.
And a huge waiting list for those people. I've got one final question for you before we get out of this very hot studio that we are sat in. If you've been through so much, and I guess I should say thank you for sharing it with us, because it's been really insightful for me. Just what you've said there is so relatable to so many people. And yeah, you've got a lot of scars that you've worn. It sounds like your wife has sadly, had those as well, but it's also there to support you. My question for you is, who is Peter Marples now, having gone through all of that?
Ooh, that's a very deep question, Gary. Who is Peter Marples? He's a very contented person, actually. He is comfortable in his own skin. He always has been actually comfortable within his own skin. He's determined still to get justice for things that go wrong. And, I was talking to somebody only the other week and said, when all this court stuff's finished and whatever, what are you going to do? And I said, actually, one thing I'd love to do is I'd love to be a champion for justice. As Sir, what's his name, Bates said, the skint little people sometimes need justice, and they need a little bit of help. I'm fortunate in that I'm not a skint little person and I can fight them. Yeah. But 99% of the people haven't got the ability, the resilience or the risk, prepared to take the risk to fight some people. And I would love to do that when this is all done, and that would be my legacy. And I do want to do something bigger. I'm talking about creating a foundation to help people into apprenticeships and things of that nature. And I do want to do something much bigger to prepare our young people from year 4 through year 13 through, as to how to actually get them ready for society as it's going to be, and help some of those people become better people, or more wholesome people, or whatever the terminology. I'm not using my words very well, but he's a very contented person. Made lots of mistakes. My biggest success, blending a family.
Yeah.
Not money.
Well, I think we absolutely are going to have our eyes peeled watching one that goes on with the court case, and I wish you the success with that, because just hearing you today, it sounds like justice is there, and I'm excited to see what you do for businesses and continue to use these scars as not a weakness, not a sign of weakness, but a sign of showing all the success that you've gone through. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Gary. I've really enjoyed it. Really good. And we can get out the hot sun now.
Let's go and sunbathe outside.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but anyway, take care.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.